According to the Association of British Insurers, flood surveys should be conducted by Chartered Surveyors or qualified civil engineers. Within the flood defence sector, there aren't any barriers to market. Anyone can set up a company offering flood defence advice or equipment without regulation. In the past, we've seen individuals with no training or expertise brand themselves as flood surveyors. Fortunately, the flood sector has moved forward a long way in the past few years, and the sector now has a voluntary Code of Practice from Ciria to further enforce high standards. One aspect we remain concerned about is when companies offer free flood surveys. Flood protection is more about knowledge, expertise, and careful consideration, not sales targets. Ultimately, if a free flood survey is conducted, the salesperson visiting must aim to make a sale to cover their time and travel, or they will go out of business very quickly. And we saw 5 flood defence companies go out of business in 2018. If a comprehensive survey is conducted, this can easily take 2 to 3 days to complete, including the site visit and preparing a report. Plus, you've got the travel and insurance costs. So what are the benefits of having a paid survey? Well, by paying for a flood survey, you're paying for the surveyor's or engineer's time, expertise and experience. They will visit with the goal of designing or recommending the best and most suitable mitigation plan. They should assess the construction style, flood risk, drainage where possible, and the lifestyle or circumstances of the client to ensure the mitigation is suitable. Equally, they will be able to recognise the limiting factors of the property which determine the scheme, such as the maximum height of recommended barriers on a certain structure. Once these factors have been assessed, the surveyor should give consideration to what would provide the best return on investment for the client, which ultimately is likely to save money in the long run. Importantly, it should be noted, flood modelling maps are limited by their resolution and often enough cannot be relied upon at a property-specific level. These are undertaken on a national scale. Understanding the limitations of these maps should be taken through seeking professional flood risk advice. The surveyor's role is to translate what the flood mapping is showing to what would likely happen on the ground at property level. Arguably, the most important stage of a flood mitigation scheme is the survey. The next steps in the mitigation project are all founded following the recommendations of the site survey. The surveyor should produce a clear report explaining where issues may occur, with steps focusing on how best to mitigate and reduce flood risk to the property. If you imagine building a house, the first step would be to have an architect draw up plans, and flood protection is no different and needs careful consideration to ensure that any issues can be resolved effectively. The surveyor should also be able to advise on any relevant permits or permissions. For example, a boundary scheme near a main river is likely to require an environmental permit. If the correct procedures aren't followed, there is the potential for future issues, such as being served an enforcement notice if works aren't compliant. Whilst flood protection will not completely remove the risk of flooding, it pays to be as well prepared as possible. What should you look for? Well, it's paramount to check the qualifications and experience of your surveyor. We would recommend confirming their qualifications and experience, along with confirming that they have full professional indemnity insurance. It is worth noting that due to GDPR, companies may not be able to share report examples with you. Adequate professional indemnity insurance is notoriously expensive for consultants within the flood sector and environmental consulting, as ultimately if something goes wrong, the consequences can be huge. In certain circumstances, a surveyor or engineer could be classified as being a designer under CDM regulations if they are making design recommendations to reduce flood risk, and therefore having the correct expertise and insurance is vital.